Alright guys, welcome back to a 117 Industries video, as well as a podcast, Master Apprentice podcast. If you guys are listening on the podcast, this is going to be a little bit of a different podcast episode, but I thought this would work very well on the podcast platform. If you guys are looking at this title and thumbnail, you might be thinking, what kind of video is this going to be? And essentially, it's going to be both our ideas and thoughts and opinions, but also kind of just going over the future of Halo and what the community thinks and what we think as well. So we obviously know Halo is kind of changing tide. They've changed tide multiple times under 343 Industries, now under Halo Studios. It seems like they're going to be changing just the flow of Halo and where it's going. We know next year we're supposed to be essentially getting a Halo CE remake, which should be really awesome. But when it comes to Halo 7 and more projects down the road, we don't really know what to expect, right? Halo 4 and 5 were pretty congruent in their story. They matched up. Like, you can kind of feel the flow of it. But from Halo 5 to Halo Infinite, vastly different. The style and the art, huge difference. The story and the story beats, even the characters, completely different. And something that I think is super important with a learning lesson from Halo 4, 5, Halo Infinite, just from 343 in general, is the antagonists, the bad guys of the games, right? Now, this obviously has a lot to do with the lore, but sometimes the lore is kind of based off of the bad guys too, right? So with all that being said, where does Halo go moving forward with Halo antagonists, with John Halo's ops? You know what I mean? We've had multiple different phases of it. I kind of made a list of just different styles. Now, a lot of these kind of fall into the same category, but the past Halo guys kind of in these categories would fall in the classic Covenant, right? That's just like where the elites are like the main focal point. Then you have the busy work with the grunts and the jackals, and then you have some hunters in there, and you have some random things in there else, you know. And that's usually we see in Halo CE, most of Halo 2, I'd say, parts of Halo 4, right? It's not the same thing. It's Joel Madam's terrorist organization, the split cell of the Covenant, but it's the same style of opponents, right? Halo 5 has that as well, and Halo Reach, you can say, does. It plays very differently, but in general it's very same. So that's the classic Covenant. Then you have the Brute Covenant, which is very similar to the classic Covenant, but the Brutes do play differently than the elites, right? And that's obviously in some of Halo 2, all of Halo 3, Halo 3 ODST. The Brutes are the ones that have the energy shields, right? They're the ones who are the main bad guys, and the elites for the most part aren't really even part of those games, and they both move and play differently. So that's kind of why I separated them. They're very similar, the Brute Covenant and the Classic Covenant, but they are kind of different eras in the Halo antagonist storyline. Then we obviously have the Flood. Now obviously between CE and 3 they don't really play the exact same, but in general, they all kind of follow the same, right? 3 might have some newer opponents with like the spiker ones that shoot, the juggernauts, but they all kind of have the, in general, same idea, right? The Flood through CE 2 and 3 have always kind of been the same, right? Then we have the Forerunner, which is pretty much all Halo 4 and 5. Again, they play differently in 4 and 5. The knights aren't exactly the same. There's the flying dudes that aren't really that big of a deal in 5, are super annoying in 4. Then you have the doggies, but in general the Forerunner and their class of being the Forerunner are the same in 4 and 5, and they're not really in any of the other Halos. Then obviously the Banished in Halo Infinite, very similar I'd say to the Classic and Brute Covenant, but it's a little bit of a combination. They do play differently than those. It's almost a combination of Classic and Brute Covenant. And then obviously the Endless, we got a little bit of a taste of it in the Halo Infinite. It feels like not a ripoff of the Forerunners, but very similar in the style that we fight them. So those are all the kind of different antagonists, different opposition we've had to face in the Halo games. And they've all kind of played differently throughout each game, but those are the kind of different sections. I'm probably forgetting something, but in general, that's kind of where they fall into. Moving forward, you know, where does Halo go? Does it try to follow in the footsteps of the past? Does it try to move forward? It's obviously a big thing to go over, kind of the history of them. Classic Covenant, I think, is probably I think it's the most recognizable. It's the easiest to play against, right? The Classic Covenant in Halo CE, Halo Reach, most of Halo 2, parts of Halo 4 and 5. It's probably the easiest, right? It's the thing the most recognizable. It's the most, if you play Mario, you're used to certain parts of Mario where you're not used to the end bits of Mario. Because everyone starts Mario, but not everyone finishes Mario. You know what I mean? It's somewhere in the same sense where everyone recognizes the grunts, the elites, and the jackals, and the hunters, right? Not necessarily everyone recognizes the brutes, right? Athen, for instance, played some Halo before we started this channel, but he didn't even recognize the brutes and the different styles they played from Halo Infinite and Halo 3 and Halo 2, right? Halo 2, they didn't have shields. Halo 3, they did have shields. There's just some big differences in the play style, right? And just because they have shields, they don't act like the elites, right? When an elite dies, they act very differently than when a brute dies. A brute charges you and it gets up personal and close. So just the styles vary differently. And then obviously they weren't focal points in Halo 4 and 5, but like I mentioned, they were like probably half of it, right? So they've had a big tenure in all of Halo. So I think it's safe to say that part of Halo and the opposition that they provide are always going to be there.
I will be honest, I think that the Banished of all of the Halo bad guys is probably... Don't get me wrong, they're scary, they're cool, but I think it's like, plot point wise, I think they're like the least interesting. If they're going to go forward with something, I know the Banished are kind of like one of the more recent ones that they're going into is in Halo Wars 2, it's in Halo Infinite, but I really feel like their like motive behind what they do is just not as interesting as nearly anything else. Their motive, for lack of a better term, is they just want control of everything. They just want conquest, just to destroy everything and be in control of everyone. And I think that's almost the exact same thing the Flood wants, but the Flood has like a reason. It's wanting one single hive mind. I think that's a lot more interesting than the Banished. I mean, I know this is my opinion, but if we're going to go forward with one bad guy or one or two bad guys in the next Halo 7, I don't personally want it to be Banished. I think it's crazy. I played Halo 5 first. So when I was finally allowed to, because I played Halo 5 when I was like 13, when I was finally allowed to go and play the other Halo games, which were rated M, I didn't recognize what the Flood was. I had no clue what the Flood was. But from Halo 1 to Halo at least 3 and on, the Flood is the overarching bad guy. And the Flood has some pretty big implications, especially with the Grave Mind and all these other big, scary horror parts of it where it's just trying to take over the entire galaxy. I mean...
I don't want to cut him off too much. I think the safe thing to say about the Classic Covenant and the Flood is if you played Halo 1 through 3, and, you could say you could throw out Reach in there as well in ODST, you really feel like their story is fleshed out. From a story standpoint, it's kind of hard to justify continuing it on when like it felt so good and the story-wise to the closing of it, right? Like I know everyone wants to see the Flood because the Flood are so cool, but it's like it makes the journey of the past seem not as important. It makes it seem not as enjoyable when you go back and play it. Same thing with the Classic Covenant, right? Athen says he doesn't want to see the Banished again, and I relatively agree. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I think going over the history of these is just important to start with. Like where they started from and where they're going. I mentioned Classic Covenant. The Brute Covenant is a weird thing because Halo 1 through most of 2, we didn't see the Brute Covenant. Like the Brutes weren't even a thing yet. But then after like Halo 3 and the Brutes get introduced as like the guys with the overshields, you skip Reach. We skip 4 and 5, and it's like in 6 or Infinite, it's like that's all there is. It's just Brutes with overshield. It's like a weird thing that the Brutes get skipped. CE not even existent, right? Reach not even existent. I mean, there's like I think a one fight that they're in, but 4 and 5 not really even existent. And then they're returned back, and they're a huge focal point. It's like every time the Brutes return, it's like that's it. They're the whole Covenant, and it's very weird that always happens. I would appreciate something more like what we got in 2, where it's a mixture of both the Brutes and the Elites. I think that play style makes fun. Or even more like the Banished. But the Banished has a good mixture. I wish the Banished had more Elites, but I think the Elites are the funnest. That's my opinion. I think most people who are classic Halo fans would come to that senses. But some of the newer fans, maybe not. You know what I mean? The Forerunner, that's a weird one. I think a lot of fans don't really enjoy the Forerunner. even me, I've always thought the Forerunner was a cool idea, but I never enjoyed the gameplay against the Forerunner. And a lot of people I've seen online who played the Halo games, it's relatively the same thing. Um, I'm sure some newer age kids, like maybe like even like Afton, maybe they enjoy the Forerunner more because that's what they grew up on. But the Forerunner's a weird one because it's very different. They play very different. The dogs move very differently. They're very similar to, like, let's say the grunts, but they don't move the same at all. They don't shoot the same at all. They don't fight the same at all. The knights, or we can say, are probably the most similar to the elites, but between 4 and 5, they play very, very differently.
Yeah.
Very differently. So it's just weird, like how different they are, and like the discrepancy of fans either love them or hate them. It feels like that's kind of what you get with the Forerunner. So that one's weird. And it's also just weird from a story point. It's like the Forerunner are literally, revered as gods in the Halo universe, 1 through 3 reaching ODST, and then they're brought in 4 and 5, and you're constantly beating them up like regular old schmoes. It's very weird for a story beat. And then Infinite, they're not even existent. It's just very bizarre, the history of the Forerunner and how they play, but also just like story wise. I would personally like to see the Forerunner story concluded in some sense, but I just don't know how that gets brought in. The Banished, I think the Banished is like the ultimatum of what we'll get for the Covenant moving forward, right? Maybe not necessarily with the Banished, but like the style of the Banished, where it's like, a secular group from the original Covenant that broke off, and they're a mixture of everything in between that was part of the Covenant. And I think that works. That way you always still have part of the Covenant. Because I think that core gameplay of the Covenant, it's part of Halo. I think if you ever get rid of that, it would just feel like something of Halo is missing. And I think that's fair to say. And the Endless, that's obviously the weirdest one. I would not hate or love to see them finished out, because Infinite wasn't necessarily received the greatest. But I don't think it necessarily had anything to do with the Endless. I would hate for Halo Studios to take that message the wrong way. Be like, oh, people don't like Halo Infinite, they must hate the Endless. Let's completely scrap that story, just like we did with the Forerunners and the Cortana story. I would hate for that to happen. That feels, we didn't even give them a proper chance. But at the same time, they weren't all that interesting. You prop the Endless up as these new big bad guys, worse than the Flood, worse than all these things, but we've never heard of them before, and you play them and they're not really super interesting. They don't play that hard. It's just like, you gotta do more to intrigue, more than the story, more with the gameplay, and I think that's something that we'll have to wait and see for sure. The rest we kind of have some answers and ideas with, but those are for sure the weirdest. The next part I kind of want to go over is like, we kind of talked about in general with all of them. Where do we see, these kind of coming back, if we do or don't, and if we want it to, I kind of answered the Covenant part, with the Brute Covenant and the Classic Covenant, and mashing it with the Banished. I think that's probably the best case scenario. I think the Banished plays just fine in Infinite, like the core gameplay loop of fighting them. The only thing I would mention is I would rather more elites. I think the elites are a better part. I think they're more interesting than the brutes. I get the idea of the brutes just being like, they're just pure evil, so like it's just easier to throw them in a game, whereas the elites have more story and like have more heart to them. That's kind of why I want them more in the game. But besides that, I think the core of like just having Covenant, I think that's like the ideal situation for it, is just kind of like loop it in with the Banished or maybe some other group. When it was Jewel Madame's terrorist organization that broke off from the Covenant in Halo 4 and 5, I think that also worked pretty good. I think it worked just fine. I wish there were brutes in those games because there wasn't for whatever reason. Banished, I think, did pretty good. I think they added too many brutes. I think there's somewhere in the middle of all of those I think works, and I think you can always have that excuse of like a terrorist group or like a broken off group of it. Because, story-wise, the Covenant were so massive and huge, it will make sense. The Flood, that's a weird one. The Flood are super, super cool. I don't really want to hit that one yet because I just don't even know how to answer it properly. Like, how do we want to see the Flood returned? I think all of us kind of do in some sense. I think the only way to do it right though is a prequel. I don't think bringing the Flood back in to the future and like making them a big threat again, I don't think it works as well. You can, I just think it gets repetitive. Like the same idea. I think you just need more ideas in Halo. That's just my personal view of it. I don't know. I think the Flood play just fine. I think they're fun. But story-wise, where do they get looped in? Should we see them again? I don't really want to see them in like a sequel, Halo 7 or 8. I think a prequel works, like a Halo Reach-esque kind of a game. You know what I mean? Like I've seen a lot of fan games of like Halo ODST on the streets of New Mombasa right before the Covenant Glass Africa because the Flood infestation. Something like that, like a DLC. I think that's a really great idea, and I think that works pretty good. We have Halo Wars 2 with the DLC where the Flood were broken out of the High Charity that was crashed on the Ark. Story-wise, that works just perfectly. I think they actually kind of concluded that story too quick. But something like that. I just don't want to see them reintroduced as like the main narrative bad guy again. I'm sure there's a way to do it, but I can't think of a way that makes a lot of sense. I need someone who's a lot more creative and inept, more than me, to think of something like that. And for me personally, I just can't think of something. Banished, we already kind of talked about. Forerunner, I've mentioned. I want to see them concluded. I agree with most fans that their core gameplay isn't good. It's not terrible, but it's just not all that interesting. It's not necessarily the most fun. It can get repetitive and get annoying. The discrepancy of difference and how they play, especially like the Knights between 4 and 5, I think is a huge problem. I think you can't have that. You can say without a doubt, like the Elites play pretty much the same in all the Halo games. You can't have that big of a discrepancy in how the Knights play in 4 and 5. That just doesn't make sense. It's not fun, it's not cool, it's not good. So fix that and then see their story concluded. The Forerunner, it's a weird thing because again, they were in the story reverenced as gods. Now they're just like a common schmo enemy, and we didn't even get to see them have a proper send-off. I would like to see a great creative mind come in and like see that story through. Maybe even a couple more Halo games on it. The Endless, I don't even know. I just hope the story isn't finished. There's not really a lot there to go off of to see what we would want them returned in or how.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is there's a lot of creative ways this can be taken. The one thing I don't want them to do for this next Halo game coming up is introduce a new enemy, and that's the new bad guy. I feel like that's been happening a little bit too often. And what I meant when I said the Banish is like the most boring, it's like story-wise. Because if you go to the Classic Covenant and the Brute Covenant, the Classic Covenant thinks that they are following the Forerunners, their god, and doing the things that they need to do to complete the great journey. Like, that's an interesting story. And then when the Prophets go and betray everyone, the Brute Covenant kind of breaks off and kind of takes control. That's interesting. If I'm talking gameplay wise, I think the Banish is like top tier because you got like so many enemies, and the Brutes and Elites are kind of flip-flop switch between the two of them, but the Brutes are more of like a tank when you're facing them. I agree, I would rather a lot more Elites than Brutes because, I mean, you can get in a loop of dying Brutes very easily, and they're just so tanky. Sometimes it just feels like they're bullet sponge, and especially in open world like Halo Infinite, it just gets repetitive and annoying.
I don't know why, but this is me personally. Let me know if you feel the same way. I just feel like the Elites play differently than the Brutes in the fact that the Elites offer more variety in the way they play. Like, sometimes an Elite will just, like, charge at you, and you're like, what the hell? Sometimes an Elite will, like, stay back and be dodgy and snipe you, you know what I mean? Like, the Elites don't always play the same, whereas Brutes, I feel like, pretty much always play the same exact way. If a Brute has a long gun, they'll stay back. If a Brute has a short gun, they'll charge. They always play the same, though. I feel like Elites, like, even if they have a long gun, sometimes they'll charge. I'm like, what the hell is happening? I like that variety in the Elites, and I think that's why I prefer the Elites more than Brutes. I don't know if that's just me, or if that's how you feel too.
I think I'll agree. I don't remember what the species of a jackal is. I think it is a jackal, but the whatever they are, the guys that hold two shields.
Yeah,
the second variation of the jackals, that's cool to have two.
Oh, the skirmishers?
Skirmishers,
yeah,
yes. It's cool to have two different variations of those jackals too, and those are in the Covenant. Like, if you think about all these different things, the Flood, they have probably like 5 variations at the very end, but then you go to the Covenant and just that group in general, you got grunts, you got skirmishers, you got jackals, which are different because they play different. You got elites, you got banished, and I mean other random enemies and things, and vehicles too. Vehicles make a difference. That's why Flood isn't always the most fun to play in, because you're not playing against vehicles, which isn't a big deal. But it's cool to have a rocket launcher and go in and defeat a whole bunch of enemies. And I personally do agree. If you hit a Brute like 2 or 3 times and 2 of them are headshots, a helmet falls off, 100% they're charging you. Like, there's some things that are just guaranteed about that. And if you throw a grenade in Elite, sometimes they'll roll away, and sometimes they'll roll right to you and try and assassinate you. And the active camo that they use with swords, annoying as can be, but like there's 10 different ways an Elite can come for you. I think they're very fun, and I mean, the Banished, we could have, they're huge. They're supposed to be huge in this little area, secluded. There could easily be a leader that still believes in the great journey, and then they break off and try to go do what the classic Covenant, the Brute Covenant did. You know, go find another Forerunner installation, and all of a sudden they're the ones that were fighting. And I think that's a much more interesting motive, I should say. Right now, the motive for Halo Infinite, we don't like John Halo. I mean, that's the Banished. We hate John Halo. He's horrible, and we're gonna go kill him. That's essentially what they're kind of doing, and it's not the most interesting. The Covenant, they think that they're going to the Great Journey, and the idea that humans are supposed to be, you need a human to do this, so they go and collect a live. Like, there's so much cool lore behind that, but the Banished, it's like, yeah, they're pretty freaking scary, and they're supposed to be scary, and they do that well, but they're just not crazy interesting. I think we could do it. I mean, there's a million ways you could do it, but like, you know, another ring, another Forerunner installation, you go there, Covenant 2, possibly not. That could be a good way to close off the Forerunner plot, because I mean, I don't personally mind the Forerunner, but they do have like 3-4 enemies total, and they're not really that crazy unique. I think that the vehicles they have sometimes are kind of cool, but the actual enemies themselves aren't anything special, and maybe it's based around the endless on this installation. You can include 2 or 3. I think the thing that Halo Infinite did well is the variety of enemies. I mean, you're going to go sit there and it's going to be, you're expecting the enemies you get, and you get the enemies you're expecting. But when you get bosses involved, the enemies are focused towards that boss. You'll get a big grunt, and there's like 500 grunts you're fighting. And it's like, what in the world? I was just fighting 2 Banished guys on crazy vehicles. This is a crazy change-up. I would love a game where you're fighting a version of the Banished or a version of Covenant, having all those different species, and then you go and have to defeat these Prometheans that are just sitting behind here for whatever reason. End their storyline. Don't end their storyline if you don't want. I could care less that way. But a variety of enemies, I think, would be just super satisfying. And I know it's like a whole bunch more programming to add enemies in for like just a little portion of the game, but I feel like that would go over pretty well.
We've kind of gone over all of the past enemies and like what we expect going forward. I want to do something a little bit different before we return to those. Is like, what would we like to see for new ideas, right? I mean, obviously we're not creative, gamers. Like, we're not creating games over here. But like, as a fan, what would we like to see that maybe they've kind of touched on that we think they could really expand on, or like just like an original idea, For example, something that I took and I thought, oh, that would be really, really cool. I know a lot of people didn't love the Halo 5 Cortana storyline. They thought it was just like very out of character and just unfinished and just not proper. And I can agree to that. But when I started thinking about the possibilities of like the whole, it feels like it could have been like Forerunner, electronic, metal kind of characters, very futuristic, more than we're already in the future. But you could have done even more of that when you introduced the AI. Like, I think the idea of AI turning is like so left field and so cool, because in this universe they're so dependent on them. I mean, you read any of the books, most ships have like an AI just attached to that ship. Like, they're so dependent on those characters. It's super important for them. So I think the idea of doing something with the AI, especially with like the AI, I forget, revolution that Cortana started in Halo 5, I think that's like a really untapped, cool story idea. Did they do it right? No, but they also really didn't get much of a chance to do something with it, and I think that could have worked really, really well. I don't know exactly how you would work AI into a physical gameplay matter, but just as story-wise, I think that would have been really, really interesting. I would have liked to see something like that. I don't know exactly how it would have worked, but I would have loved that. I think that would have been unique, but also seemed fitting. You know what I mean? Just newer aliens in general. You know what I mean? Like, I think in general it works just fine. People were like, well, like, it's repetitive. It's just a different Covenant, different aliens. Yeah, you can say that, but like, I mean, there's different things in Star Wars where like, oh, it's just the Sith and the Jedi, but then you have this other alien species that shows up and they matter, and this is why, and the stakes do matter. You know what I mean? Like something like that, where it's like this, kind of like the Endless, like this threat from years and years ago that was stored away. Something like that, just done more proper, more variation. I don't know. I think the overall tune matters, like the overall scene that they set with different aliens and different species. That kind of matters. You know what I mean? Like the Endless were set up as worse than the Flood. Well, that's just weird. That's how you would set it up. When the Flood, for literally like 7 games, was set up as the big bad, and then all of a sudden you throw in this other guy, and they're underwhelming. You know what I mean? Like they're set up as to be really, really bad, but there's one or two variations, and you defeat them pretty quickly. You know what I mean? Like the Flood are known as the big bad, but you die to them pretty quickly. You know what I mean? Like the library is not an easy mission. Everyone hates that mission for a reason. Not necessarily just because it's the Flood. It's mostly because it's long and tedious, but also because the Flood are super annoying, right? Cortana on Halo 3, that Flood mission isn't that fun. Yeah, let me tell you. I just beat it on Legendary not that long ago. Real annoying. Real annoying. So, like, they were annoying, and they were hard. And this wasn't really ever that hard. They weren't really that annoying. So, something like that, doing a different idea than the Endless, maybe not setting them up to be as crazy and overpowered as the Endless were set up, but something like that where you just set up something else, the Return of the Prophet, something like that. I don't know. I just feel like there's more to be set up than that what the Endless were.
Yeah, and I mean, personally, I think AI is the way to go. AI revolution, or possibly an AI that was aboard a ship and, decided to go out on its own, find its own stuff, and start fresh with its own little things. I think it'd be really cool to face an AI, and first off, you can't really kill one because it can go into your armor, it can go into everything. It's like impossible to kill an AI if they discover the cure to rampancy.
I forgot. I think it was AI. But in Halo Infinite's like side story with the multiplayer, they had like an AI turn on taking control of the Spartans' armors. Like even something like that would be pretty cool. That's something. Obviously, the multiplayer for Infinite and the story wasn't fleshed out, but there was a lot of potential in all that story beat. And I think just like the idea of that, but like you make it into the campaign and make it much more bigger, that would definitely be really cool.
Yeah, I was about to say, if you're fighting an enemy, say you're fighting a whole bunch of Prometheans say you're fighting Covenant, it doesn't matter, and then all of a sudden you got some Marines behind you in a tank, and the tank starts shooting you, and they're telling you that they can't control, like that'd be cool as can be. And I mean, taking over Spartan armor would be cool. There's a million different ways you could do it. I think it'd be cool to put an AI that found the Endless and tried to team up with them. I don't know. I think adding another alien species would be kind of weird. Not negative completely. Like, when they added brutes, there's nothing really negative about that. They were cool. But if you added something, here's the Covenant and here's these other bad guys, well, at the same time, it would almost have to be a group of bad guys because you don't want them all to be one species. And because if you do, then you're facing the same character over and over again. That's what's great about the Covenant. You're facing like 3 or 4 different species, more than. But if you add another alien in, then it's like he could... If it's just a one alien, that'd be weird. If it's a group of aliens, why haven't we heard about it earlier is the question raised.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of AI, though, because it can be used in so many ways. It could be your own equipment used against you. It could be the Promethean. It could even be an AI taking control of a dead Promethean station and making some of the old Covenant people still believing in the Forerunner gods that it's really an AI in control and telling them what to do. Like that's an idea. There's a million things you could do with an AI that discovered the cure to rampancy.
Yeah, and I think something that's obviously missing from this conversation that would be new, but not necessarily new from the story, is like humans, like a civil war, right? Like right before the Covenant showed up, the military was having a problem facing its own people, right? That there was a civil war essentially going on throughout the whole galaxy, right? Going back and doing like a prequel game or two on that would be super awesome. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, it would be very, very different than what we're used to, because we're used to, as humans, beating up aliens. But, like, I mean, that would be pretty cool. I think it would work. You know what I mean? Or, like, a variation of, like, humans working with aliens. Like, that would work, too. Like, some sort of, like, revolt kind of story, I think works. And I wasn't saying, like, new aliens, just introducing a new faction, but, like Athen mentioned, we've had so many aliens just introduced that, like, it works. You know what I mean? The brutes were introduced in Halo 2. The drones were introduced in Halo 2. Those have only been like 2 or 3 games, and when they're brought in, they play in just fine. They're not in every Halo game, though, you know what I mean? The skirmishers, they're not in every game, but when they're brought in, they're fun. They work just fine. The Endless even, like the Endless aren't super interesting, but if they were just brought in as like another big bad guy that like super powered the Covenant, I think it would have just worked. You know what I mean? Like they were interesting enough. They didn't. I think they were just overpropped was the problem with them, and they just didn't have enough development on them yet. But even like that, you just introduced a new species, and it kind of worked. You know what I mean? So that I think that's something you can do. The problem is you just have to set it up right. You know what I mean? Like I think the reason the enemies of Halo 1, 2, 3 Reach work so well is because of the scene, like how it is set up through the story, right? Like the deep lore with the Covenant and like the Civil War that sparks in Halo 2 is so interesting. It's so intriguing, and it like makes the battle against the Covenant all that more interesting. You could play the game for so many hours, but like the enemies will still have interest because of the story behind it. The Flood get repetitive, probably the easiest in my opinion in the Halo games, but they always stay interesting. Like the intention of the Flood and just the journey that you get taken throughout the Halo games is super interesting, and I think that's what really matters. You know, I think part of the problem with the Endless is there wasn't a lot of story propped up, and they were just supposed to be these big huge bad guys. I don't think that was enough to get everyone excited to face these new guys. You've got to do more than that. I'll admit, I think the Forerunners weren't set up that proper in Halo 4, but I think as Halo 5 went on, I think there was more done that made them more and more interesting as they started teaming up with Covenant cells. Okay, why are they doing that? You know what I mean? The Didact is probably the most interesting part of the Forerunner. Bring him back. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, he got teleported in a black hole. Okay, he's an ancient god, essentially. You know what I mean? Like, of course he could survive that. You just have to write it in. I know there's that graphic novel that they kill him off again. But again, you know, decanonize it, add him back. You can easily do it and then make it super interesting. I think there's something in that you could do. And just like new directions for some of these factions. Like I said, I would like to see the Flood, but I don't want to see them brought in as the overall narrative bad guy. I think prequel is fine, a DLC is fine. I just don't want to disrespect the past. You know what I mean? I've grown up through Star Wars, Indiana Jones, you know, all this new Disney era stuff, and it's tough to see some of these legacy stories kind of be brought down because the new ones want to be propped up by ripping down the legacy stuff. And I don't want to see that done. Not necessarily, like purposefully, but like improperly. By bringing back the Flood and reintroducing them, you almost make the legacy stuff not important, and I just don't want that. You know, classic Covenant, I don't think we're ever gonna get that again. You know, and that's fine. I think you're gonna have always a variation with the Brute Covenants and like the Brutes having, you know, energy shields and all that. I think that's always how you're gonna get it. I would like to see more of a medium. I don't know. The Brutes and the elites don't get along. Like, they're notoriously known for not getting along. I think you can play on that more. You know, that's a new direction that, like, I think you could definitely play on. It's something I've always wanted to see, and I think a lot of fans agree on, is the most interesting part of Halo 5, beyond a doubt, is the Sangheli's Civil War. Right? Going to Sanghelio, whatever it's called, and partaking part of that Civil War, which you really didn't. You still fought Forerunner, essentially. But, like, just the scene of it was badass. And I think going into that more, in playing potentially as the Sanghelios, and then maybe going against the Banished, that'd be super cool. But just, like, changing the narrative story-wise, I think makes it all the much more interesting, right? I would love to see something like that. You know, the Endless, I don't know. We'll see. Make it more interesting. You got to do more than what you've done. Forerunner, I don't know what they could do to change it to make it more interesting. But I think the best way is just work on it, right? Having it more familiar and just like, yes, Halo 5 wasn't great, but I think what makes Halo 5 all the much more worse is the way that it was chopped down at the legs before I could finish the race. It just made it all the much more worse in my heart. Like, when I finished Halo 5, I was like, ugh, well, this sucks. And then when I started playing Halo Infinite, it's like, oh, this sucks even worse. It's like, oh, we had this crappy story and this giant leap to get to this end, and it's like, oh no. Even Halo Wars 2 was trying to help set it up, and they just cut it out. And it's just like, I don't think you can do that. I don't think that's proper. I think you've got to change the story, reintroduce them, maybe do a better job for introducing them, making them more menacing. I think if there's anything that can be more menacing than the Flood, which I don't think there should be, but you can make it the Forerunner, right? I think that's fine. The Flood should always stay the main bad guy. I mean, for Christ's sake, the Forerunner created galaxy-wide killers in the Halo rings to destroy the Flood. Like, the Flood should always be the reverence of, like, the big, bad evil. But the Forerunner are shoot like the next best thing, you know what I mean? So, I don't know if those are necessarily new directions that they could take them, but just, like, ideas and routes they can take them that maybe work.
I got one last thing that I think would be great fan service. I mean, Halo Infinite's definitely turned more into a live service game with the multiplayer. They keep adding updates, keep adding seasons of Battle Pass. I've heard so many people say playable elites. Doesn't necessarily have to be an elite. It can be a whatever species, but another species playable would be cool as can be. I think that's one of the things I like the most about going and playing the Master Chief Collection is I can go and play some games where they have playable elites where, I mean, obviously you got to put that into the plot in one way or another, but the multiplayer aspect, being able to be a playable elite, is just so cool to me, even though it's really no different than it normally would have been anyways.
Yeah, like I said, like the St. Helio story, Civil War, in Halo 5 was by far the most interesting part of that game. It wasn't really done proper because you really didn't do much with it, but it would have been cool to do more with it. And like, I think everyone, you know, while everyone loves Master Chief, no one wants to see him go, I think the next best thing is the Arbiter. Like, where's that dude been? Come on. You know, he used to be a playable character. He was super awesome, super important. He doesn't need to be the focal point of every game, you know. But, like, he should be a character that should not be sidelined for the last 3 main Halo games. Or 2, I guess. Because he was sidelined for all of Halo 4 and all of Halo Infinite. He was part of 5, but he was mostly sidelined. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't see him with the Master Chief. That's something that I think is missing. There's some ways you can take these stories that I think makes it more interesting. There's some new things you could bring in that make it more interesting. You know, obviously, it could just take a creative mind that just creates something that's so left field that we're not even expecting that works, you know. But until that's really seen or heard, who knows? You know, I'm very interested by this topic because the Halos are part of, you know, the Halo's story and like the antagonist is part of the lore. That's what makes it, you know, without a good antagonist, the lore is not interesting. But without a good lore, the antagonists aren't interesting. They work in tandem. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how they go forward. Because, you know, I think something that 4 or 5 had that wasn't super great was the 5 didn't really have a great story. 4 had a pretty okay story, but the enemies weren't all that interesting. 5 had okay enemies, but the story wasn't all that good. And it just didn't add up. And Halo 5 had, I mean, Halo Infinite had pretty good enemies, but the story didn't add up. Like, it just made it not as important. Halo 1 through 3, the story was amazing, and the enemies were propped up because of it. So I think that's very interesting to look at and go over. I'm interested to see what Halo Studios announces at the end of this year. I think it's December or October or something like that at Halo World Championship Series. They're announcing something. I think it's obviously going to be Halo CE, but maybe we get something more than that. Maybe we get like a 2027 announcement, Halo 7 trailer coming next year, something like that. I would love that. That would be enough, because that would be enough hype to get everyone back on the train. And I just Halo's a classic, legendary game that I wanted to see return to form, and it starts some parts with the lore, but also the antagonist of the story. So let us know what you guys think about all this down in the comments. Athen, you got anything else before we close out?
That's it for me.
All right, don't forget to hit that like. Don't forget to hit that subscribe. I'm sorry if I said Star Wars instead of Halo. I'm sure I did a couple times in this video. I get those mixed up a lot, but in general, I'm excited about these topics. I'm excited about Halo, excited about the future, even though it's in a low for sure. But I'm excited for the future nonetheless. Don't forget to hit that subscribe, like. If you guys are listening on podcast, we appreciate it. Don't forget to hit that follow and download, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Peace.
Thought I'd try shooting my way out. Mix things up a little.